Hello again, this is Gail Cameron from My Pocket Coach, and this is our series of leadership lessons. And with us today, we have a highly respected banker and a leader in financial services. Welcome, Tom Winterboer.
Hi, Gail. Thanks. It's good to chat to you again.
So just as way of formal introduction, so Tom, you've been in financial services as a leader for PWC Africa and a member of their global financial services leadership team and governing body until you retired from PWC in 2016. You've also served as chairman of the SAICA Banking Project Group for 8 years. And of course, I think this is what you're most famous for. You were curator of African Bank until its successful relaunch in 2016. In 2018, you were appointed as a non-executive director at First Rand, serving on various committees, including the Audit Committee, Risk Capital and Compliance Committee. And I mean, I've known you for a long time, Tom, I've always respected and been inspired by the way in which you have led people. But what I didn't know was that you'd actually done a dissertation in human resources. So that explains a lot, that you really cared a great deal for people. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thanks, Gail. Yeah, so it's always nice to talk to you. And also to the, I suppose, people who are up and coming leaders, young leaders. And I think what, we'll talk about probably more appropriate to them. And I hope they find it helpful.
Thanks, Tom. So let's just explore a few questions. So what is the important leadership lesson that you think you learned in your career?
Yeah. Gail, I think to start off, I continue to learn all the time and even now. So I think that's something to bear in mind. As you said, I did the dissertation at my 15-month part-time program at Business School for Leadership, and did it on foundation and leverage attributes. And I think that's probably one of the most important things. So maybe should have done it earlier in my career. But I found that through this research, there's certain foundation attributes, and that will say, well, what are those things that someone in a professional services firm, what are those things that he or she must be able to do? And it's a bit like, can the cat, catch the mouse? And I think that is the one question. The other part of it's, what really makes a difference? What are those leverage things which makes you better? And I suppose you pull it through to competitive advantage. And those things would be things like emotional intelligence, would be people skills, and that sort of thing. And I think the important thing there is to develop, the leverage skills that you don't have, and develop them as far as you can. And in particular, really, listening and observing and so on, because that I think is absolutely prime. I think the other thing that goes with it is you don't start being, at the top of the game and top of the league. And I think many of the people who view this must realize that. So, it's hard work, and you really got to find some role models and mentors out there. And also get the best coaching, and you'll know that we send a number of people from PwC to you, to be coached. And I think I'm on record there to say that we've probably had a 90% success rate with Image Excellence. So it's been very good for us. But I think it's picking up those things as you listen and observe and ask people to go and work on it. And I can tell you that people in the PwC organization at the time, they're very complimentary, and they certainly learned a lot from that. Then, you've got to look at, certainly, if you're wrong, you've got to admit it. I was watching Warren Buffett's AGM 2020 AGM at Berkshire Hathaway. He made some investments in airlines and he sold it. And people said, "Jesse, you got it wrong." And he said, "Yes, I got it wrong. I did what I thought was the right thing, but with COVID and so on, it was the wrong thing and we sold." So I think that's quite important to be able to stand up to that. Then just the general thing is to make sure we treat all people with respect and dignity. And I think it's just so important that, you know, you just don't dismiss people or whatever it is. I think it's a crucial element.
Thanks for that, Tom. And how have you built confidence and or resilience over your career?
I think firstly we got to say to ourselves that we all have much more resilience that we'll give ourselves credit for. And I honestly believe that very strongly. It doesn't matter who you are, but sometimes we doubt our own abilities and so on. So I can, you know, lots of resilience. Then I suppose for the, you know, younger, you know, sort of leaders out there, guys and girls, I mean, I'm just a regular guy, and you've got to sort of work at these things. So, you know, sometimes you think, you know, all the leaders out there, you know, you start at the top and you've always been brilliant, but you've got to work at it, and it's, you know, you've got to work hard at it. So I think that's quite important. You know, as I say, it's hard work, it's a process. But you've got to also realize that you're responsible for your own career, and I know that there's some entrepreneurs who may watch this, but you've got to ask yourself, where is it that you need to improve? You know, and certainly in my own sense, I did a course to help me, you know, deal better in big meetings. I did a course on negotiation skills. We talked about the course I did at UNISA. And many of these things I paid for myself. You know, you often find that youngsters will say, well, my organization, you know, doesn't sponsor, they don't want to do this. I mean, I'd actually go to these full-time classes, you know, a week every 3 months, you know, and return to the office at 5 or so and, you know, continue my day. So you've really got to make those sacrifices, but you've got to back yourself. The second thing I think you need to do is to find a framework that you can refer to, and not all frameworks are, are 100%. So in my PWC days, there was a framework we used called Project Blue, and that would really just say, so what do you look at, you know, and you've got to look at, you know, what is the, you know, what are the things you need to adapt to, what are the things you need to change. Also gets you back to what should be on a board's agenda, what should be on a CEO's agenda. And things change. I mean, when we did that, I mean, COVID certainly wasn't around. You know, we've seen many other changes like climate change and the like. So, you know, life will change and so on. But I think that framework just helps your thinking. The other one which we did, and it's a very old publication, we said, well, you know, simplify to succeed. And sort of gives you sort of 5 areas to focus on, and it says you've got to look at what your business does best, you've got to look at your demographics and make sure your products are lined up with that, you've got to look at your business itself, make sure you simplify that, you know, make sure that you look after your people, that sort of thing. So you've really got to, you know, simplify it. And I often say, if you can't explain something to someone in 3 minutes, and I know the exceptions, you know, maybe you don't understand it so well yourself. So I think it's very important to, you know, to find some framework, but also, you know, try and explain things in a more simplistic language. Got to get out of your comfort zone. You know, it's so easy just to say, look, you know, I do what I do, and I, you know, hopefully do it well and so on. But you've got to sort of move out of that. Then in terms of professionalism, I think that's quite an important area. And I mean, for you know, all people out there, you know, and I often talk about true professionals, and the big thing there is you've got to do things to the, you know, absolutely to a standard of excellence. And I think we've got to distinguish just between a standard of excellence and perfection. You know, I find that if you try and do some things to perfection, and we see many people like that, you just never get it out. But X non-negotiable, and you get to the point where you say, you know, people must be able to make mistakes, but refer to them as affordable mistakes. So don't go out to do something stupid. So I think that is quite important. So I think, you know, that certainly has helped me over the years and helped my confidence and resilience. One of the other things, I mean, just getting out of the comfort zone, I did quite a lot of work with Professor Brian Metcalf. We did lots of surveys and studies on South African banking. And I must say, the first time we went out there, and 25 years ago, he said, well, okay, now we got to launch this. And I said, Brian, you're like, over to you. And the second year, I realized the importance of that. And, you know, we can all go out there and slowly but surely get ourselves into it. But you've got to get yourself out of that comfort zone. So yes, I think those things build you over time, but people must realize it's a process.
I love what you said when you said keep it simple and help people to understand it, in a short version. Because I think that's what Einstein said is, it's really about simplifying complex issues. If you can't help people to understand that, then, it's not simple enough.
Yeah.
So,
the other thing that was mentioned is just to do sufficient reading. And you often see someone like Buffett who says he spends quite a lot of time reading. I would say that, person reads many books. The one that I've read certainly that's made the biggest impact on my career is a book called What They Don't Teach at Harvard Business College, and that was written by Mark McCormack, who's the business manager for Gary Player and others. And I think there's just a lot of practical advice, and sometimes people forget that, just those basic things. So a lot of reading, there's a book called Everything's Negotiable. That certainly helps you. Gavin Kennedy, Bob Buford, Halftime, and so on. So I think it's just important to read those books and just, get your own mindset right.
And I think you gave me the McCormick book quite early in my career, Tom, and it was a brilliant read. So talking about staying motivated, how did you manage to stay motivated during COVID?
Yeah, Gail, in terms of the actual COVID time, I think you've got to at least have some structure to your day. I think you've got to look how you do it, and I think the big thing there is to make sure that you have some structure. In terms of COVID itself, it's so, and also motivating people. You talk about the African Bank curatorship that we went through. And I think there are quite a lot of lessons for people through that and what we saw that. So, the biggest things I found that as a leader, you've really got to make sure that you understand the issues, facing a business or facing whatever you're doing. The second thing is, to surround yourself with, so I would call true professionals. So that's a great team. And really, you got to find those guys and girls that are often much better than you are. So I think that's quite important. And what I did there is to say, look, there are 3 areas to be addressed, and it gets you back to sort of, what's the focus, the top 3 or big 5. And at that stage, we said, look, we've got to stabilize the bank. The second thing we had to do is we had to make sure we get the transaction through with creditors and the like. And thirdly, we had to set up a new bank. So it's quite easy if you think along those lines, and we often see people say, okay, they're the 20 steps for success. If you ask them, I could probably not even remember the first 10. So I think that was fairly simple. We then, I realized the significance of saving the bank, for the employees. So you go out there and you find that people were literally scared. And I suppose that's what we've been seeing with COVID now. You got that stage, I couldn't guarantee them, things for the future, how it would work out. But what I could sort of assure them of is that I would do everything in my power. And I think that personal commitment in this COVID time is just very important. I then sort of started with the end in mind, saying, where do you want to end? Now with COVID, I think it's obviously difficult, but you've got to at least have something out there that you build back to. So you've got to set out milestones, and you've got to make sure that you communicate, and you can never underestimate that. You've got to remain open-minded that circumstances could, and they probably will change, and that you need to change your planning. Often, I suppose people would say, well, you told us we're going to do it in a certain way or whatever's going to happen. But there are lots of things that we can't dictate, so that's important. What helped me is I try to play out the events in my mind, meetings in my mind, to say, well, okay, I'm seeing, the creditor group or whatever it is, just to try and think about the possible questions, think about, things from their point of view. So I think that certainly helped me quite a lot. Another thing, and I think advice for people in this COVID time is to make sure that you do the walkabouts. And, You know, I remember my PA would sometimes, when I get up, say, "Where you off to?" And I'd say, "I'm going to do some walkabout." And I think you've got to be at the coal face. You know, I literally went around to many of the branches. I went around to the call centers. I went to the collections areas. I went to, we granted loans. And as you go, you actually pick up the practical issues. You know, you look at something where, there are long queues in terms of credit applications, but at least you can deal with it because you now understand it. The other thing is there was a bonus scheme in terms of loans granted. I could hardly understand the scheme. It was so complex. So you've got to give people something that they understand. It certainly helped in terms of catch-ups. You find that people have, these meetings and often default to an hour's meeting, in the diary. I found that just these quick catch-ups worked. And certainly even before African Bank and in the days at PWC, some days you'd have 8 meetings in a day for an hour each, and especially if they're internal ones. And they're clearly important, but I'd find that if you just walk around, you probably deal with probably 4 or 5 of them within an hour or 2, just because people felt they had to set up a meeting. So I think that is quite an important one.
Yeah.
Further, I think documents, one should try and stick to 5 slides, 3-liners, 1 pages. Otherwise people just read and they've got to really dig to find the issues in there. I think one needs to be very humble and have empathy. And I think that arrogance is certainly one of the worst things. And when we started at African Bank, I said to the staff, and we had a huge meeting the day we kicked off, I said, look, if you find that anybody doesn't treat you with respect and with dignity, I mean, the line is open to me. And I think it's just so important that people know that they're valued. So that is certainly critical.
That's so important in COVID now, Tom, just for leaders to be able to participate in people's feelings.
The problem at the moment is there are so many people working off-site. And once again, I think just that quick call or a quick WhatsApp or whatever it is, I think we've got so many ways of communicating with people that we've got to make sure we utilize that. African Bank time, certainly a sense of humor helped a hell of a lot. It just gets so serious. You can never relax in terms of the importance of what you're doing. But I think, you got to work at least around some of those lighter moments, show people they appreciate it, and make them understand there's light at the end of the tunnel. So and then you get to the last bit of this is sort of the quantum physics thing, and I know that you and I have spoken about it, and you talk quite a lot about quantum physics in terms of what you help people with. But I recall in the African Bank time, and people would say, if there's anything, we'll talk, Tom, and it's more one of those things where you think to yourself, well, I mean, there's certain things that you can never do, but the things that may be difficult, and someone once said, make a molehill out of a mountain, but I think it's that belief that you can get it right, and that has certainly helped a hell of a lot. And I think for people through this COVID time, I think one's got to use that quantum physics thing of, yes, we can do it.
Yeah, so important, because thoughts are things, they are real, and obviously you want to be mindful of what you're putting out there. So what do we need to be mindful of in a post-COVID world?
Gail, I mean, it's firstly, we've got to recognize that this is a 1 in 100-year event. And often when you talk to friends and business people, I say, well, why did business not prepare for this? Now, I think it's firstly, it is just so exceptional that you can hardly, have prepared for it. So I think that's the first thing. So I think we'll see a lot of changes in terms of South Africa's battered economy. And that really gets us to the point where there will be, job losses. Some companies will really never reopen. Companies will be more conservative in terms of funding, in terms of business, in terms of appointing people. So we've got to realize that. Others will drive internet sales. So I think, a very different focus. We've seen lots of talk about working from home, versus in the office. On that one, my sense is, it's a bit like chicken and red meat. If we can't get red meat, we can't say that people have now permanently switched to chicken, and once the red meat comes back, that is the real test. So I think once things have normalized, we'll see the real effect of that. But there's no doubt in my mind that, that face-to-face meetings will come back. And I think importantly so. I talked to someone that attended a strategic session, via Zoom, Teams, and said, he just lost so much. And he's a, non-executive director at a company, lost so much because, didn't have that face-to-face meeting. Then I think two more comments. I think the one is, if there was ever a time for government and labor and business to work together, I think this is it. People really need to get together and make sure we work things out. And then the other one is, COVID-19, and it's touched the hearts and souls, and not just the pockets of ordinary South Africans. And those are people who believe in real democracy and freedom. And it's really, doing the right thing. And I don't think we should underestimate the, just that resilience that South Africans have. And I must say, I remain hopeful that we'll get through this, and hopefully in a stronger and better place eventually.
I know you've got you're really close to your family, but how did you stay motivated during COVID?
Gail, I think it's looking sometimes just for those small things. Your career and what you do in terms of business, that's not the only thing. So, in terms of, clearly I've had my responsibilities as a non-executive director. My one son has a small business. I must say I was much more interested at that stage because it's hard. And for people who are watching this, the entrepreneurs, small business people, I know it's hard. So I spent quite a bit of time with him thinking about, what are the next things? But I mean, it's his business and he does the way he thinks it should be. So that certainly, I think, keeps you motivated. And often you've got to look at the small things, I mean, our lives, isn't just our health or just our career, there are many facets of our life. And there's so many other things, so, it's your health, it's your own fitness, it is your relationships. And I think you just got to work that little bit harder and find pleasure in doing some of those things. And I think it's just so important that we don't think, our lives is just one facet. So that certainly helped out a lot.
And how would you describe your leadership style? And, how has this served you through your career?
Firstly, I think you've got to look at your personality when you, in terms of leadership style. So my own personality, I believe I've got a fairly open mind, but with a very strong set of values. And I think that those values certainly drives you. And, thinking back over the years, I think R&B's got a slogan called traditional values, innovative ideas. And I think it is just so true. And in the business that you do and in terms of your leadership position. Some people still say, well, if I haven't sent you the memo, it's not there, or whatever the case may be. I think we've got to stand up for what we've said to people and what we present as the truth. So my own leadership style is probably one of servant leadership, leaning towards that. But with a very strong focus on situational leadership. Now, situational leadership, I think, is a very old concept. I'm not even too sure it's still in the business literature, but certainly, that's what I would follow. So in practice, I would say to people who work with me, say in the PWC days, say, look, this is your client, it's your assignment. So can you, I work for you, make sure that I'm at the right places at the right time. So you really transfer that responsibility onto another person, but in your own mind, you've got to make sure that those milestones are achieved. And I would often keep in touch just informally and say, hey, what's happening, or you hear things happening in the industry, and just make sure that your team, have thought about it. So I think that is very important. And then, as I said earlier on, African Bank is a good example. You've got to be at the coal face, and certainly in terms of CA and so on, you've got to spend time with the people. You've got to see what happens out there. And then I sort of, this one of my friends, someone that I met, a number of years ago, and I said, I recall you were a provincial rugby player, and well, I can't remember which team and so on you played for. He says, Tom, sometimes, he says, and older rugby players, the older you get, the better you were. And I think we got to just guard against that, to not to be too clever, and whenever we talk to people, try and let them understand how to do. So I'm very sensitive to that. And the other thing, and maybe it's something for the people raiding the state coffers. The other thing this gentleman said, he says, Tom, at least you want to be able to look your mother in the eye and say, can you be proud of me if I've done that? So that's a simplistic view of looking at it. But I think as leaders, we've always got to reflect and say, how did you do? At African Bank, once again, once we finished the process and, the new bank was, started up and running, I sat with the senior guys and girls of the team and I said, well, how do you think we did? And mostly people said, yes, we did wonderfully. And I think obviously all of us were proud of what we achieved there. But once you sit and you say, well, where is it? You come up with quite a number of places where you say, if I had to do it again, I would probably do a number of things differently. So you mustn't just, walk off and say, hey, well done and so on. You've got to reflect and be, I suppose, better the next time, or leave some lessons for others to be better.
And what advice would you like to give the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, I would say there are three areas where I would suppose come up with advice. The first one is just general, where I'd say, people must stay on the high ground and do the right thing. Often some deals and things look so attractive, but you've got to stay on the high ground and you've got to do the right thing. You also got to stand back and see issues for what they are. Are there things that you're not seeing? People would give you a document, would give you a proposal, and it all looks great. And I had a discussion last week with someone where I said, well, where's your credit support for your transaction, and it's all fancy footwork that someone presented to them. So I think it's stand back and see what it is. Less is better, and I think I talked about that, and there are exceptions, but it's really, even in your own mind, try and explain something, in 3 minutes. If you don't, get it right, maybe you should read some more, listen some more, and get it right. Then I think be honest with yourself. I think for young leaders, entrepreneurs, you often have a plan out there, and there's the company scorecard, and you come to the end of the year and you've done very well. But in your own mind, and even if it's confidential to yourself, you've got to ask yourself, did you really use those leverage attributes? Could you have done better? Should you have done better? And it's hard, but I think that's the important thing. The two other things is, someone asked me, in fact, 10 days ago as well. So how do you, if I had to be given more responsibility in my company, bigger leadership role, I'm a bit worried. And I said, I think for most young leaders, you've got to sit back and almost have your own little 5-slide plan where you say, if this was my business, how would I run it? How would I do it? It's so easy to criticize and the leader of a company and so on. But sit back and say, if someone said, hey, how would you do it? And even as you interact with other leaders in your company, make sure you've got call it your shadow plan, but understand what it is, and at least you've put some thought into it. Then finally, I think there's an 80-20 rule, but life's a journey, and I think you must enjoy what you do. And if you can't, you've really got to ask yourself, what is it that you should change?
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for those wonderful words of wisdom and guidance. And it really is valuable for young leaders to listen to that. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Gail. Great to talk to you.